G'day, Stu from UAVfutures here, and today I'm going to show you how to build this. Now this is the cleanest build I have ever done. I'm so proud of it, so I thought I'd show you how I did it. This is the Armattan F1-Pod, and it is a super sleek build and also an awesome machine. So I'm going to show you how I did it, go through the steps to make it look like this. Alright, some things you're going to need. You're going to need a soldering iron, definitely, and some wire cutters. They are essential. Then, highly recommended is a little bit of Loctite. So I've got some blue Loctite just here. And, of course, a hot glue gun. So they're recommended, but not essential, those two. Let's get to it. Alright, so here's everything that comes in the kit. And we're going to start off with the PDB. And you'll still need to get your own receiver and FPV set up too. Alright, so the first thing we're going to do when building our pod is we're just going to pre-tin some of these little pads on here. There's not too much to do because it's so simple and all inbuilt into this PDB. So we're just going to pre-tin our ESCs and ESC positives and grounds, and also the signal and grounds just here. And we're also going to pre-tin the positive and negative terminals for something. I'm not going to pre-tin the XD60 connector just yet. I'm going to save that till last so I have a bit more room and it can be stable, because otherwise it's going to be sitting up like that and a little bit awkward to work on. And then I'm going to also pre-tin while I'm here my LED strip, and make sure you do the VDD, the DI and the ground. So there's 3 out of the 4 that you need to pre-tin on this as well. Alright, so they're all the ESC pads and the positive and negative terminals tins just there. And now we're just going to do the VDD, DI and ground. So ground is this one just here. Alright, now because this is all integrated with the PDB and the flight controller, the only thing I need to pre-tin just here and get ready is a connection for our receiver. And I'm going to be running PPM, so I only need to do this channel just here, so channel 1 and then the positive and the ground. So I'll tin that up right now. So that's it for our PDB pre-tinning. Alright, so the next thing I want to do, I want to get each of my 4 arms and 4 motors, and I'm going to mount using some Loctite, I'm going to mount my motors to my arms. Alright, don't worry about all this excess wire here because we're going to cut that off a bit later in the build anyway. Alright, now good little tip when you're putting your motors on your arms, always use a little bit of Loctite, and this will stop your screws coming undone in some of the vibrations or things that happen when you're flying around. And you want to make sure that it can spin freely and nothing's touching the bearing in just here, so the bearing's sitting perfectly inside this little pre-drilled hole. Alright, so let's do this to all 4 arms and then we'll move on. Alright, so there's all 4 motors done just here, and now the next step we're going to be cutting our wires and measuring them out for our ESCs. Alright, now before we attach our motors to our ESCs, the first thing we're going to do, we're going to take off this shrink wrap here and desolder some of these wires just here, because we're going to directly solder our motors to our ESCs. And all you have to do, just take a sharp knife, cut down the side and then peel it off. So we'll do all that to all 4 first. Alright, so now we've done that, the next thing we want to do is desolder these wires here, because we're going to directly connect our motors straight to these little connections just here. So the easiest way to do that, get a bit of blue tack or glue tack, whatever it's called in your country, hold it down, and then we're just going to desolder it. And then once I've done that, I'm just going to freshen up the solder on top for next time when we put something on there. Alright, what I'm going to do here, this is completely optional. I'm just going to swap out this red wire for another black one just here, and this is the one I took off the ESC, and that's just so I can have a pretty cool color scheme. So you don't have to do this at all, and if you do it, just remember which one is the positive and which one is the ground. So I've taken a photo so I can remember for future reference, but I'm just going to swap this out here, but you don't have to do this step at all if you don't want to. So I'm just going to desolder the positive, the red positive, and solder in a black wire instead. Alright, so I'm going to do this to all 4 of them, and then we'll be back. Alright, so I've got my 4 ESCs done, and now it's time to attach them to our motors. Alright, so what we're going to do in this step, excuse a little bit of mess I've got going on, is we need to connect our motors and we're going to directly solder them to our ESCs. So you don't have too much room here, so you're going to have to cut them quite short. So what I recommend doing, just sit your top plate over here, your PDB over the holes on top of the arms, and think about how much room you're going to need. So I'm going to need about 1 centimetre of wire on this side of the ESC, and that's going to allow me to wire it up just here. So I'm going to cut those and cut them along all of the motors, and then we'll get back to it. Alright, so I've cut my little motor wires quite short, and now I'm just going to strip the ends to make it easier for pre-tinning and soldering. And now that's done, I'm just going to pre-tin the end of them, and that'll make it so it's nice and easy so it can meld together with our ESC connections. So just pre-tinning them just here. Alright, and now it's time to attach them to our ESCs. Alright, now we're going to wire them up to our ESCs, and this part is pretty important because you need to do them in 2 separate ways. So for 2 of the motors, you're going to wire the connection straight across, so the top wire to the top connection, middle to middle, and bottom to bottom. So that's going to be for 2 of them. For the other 2, what you want to do is wire the top wire to the middle pad, the middle wire to the top pad, and the bottom straight across, because that means it is going to spin the motor in the opposite direction, because you need one set spinning one way, 1 set spinning clockwise, 1 set spinning counterclockwise. And I'll explain a little bit about that more when it's time to attach them. Alright, so these ones I'm just going to be wiring straight across, and I've just put a little bit of blue tack there to hold my ESC in place to help me, and whichever way is comfortable for you, and then I'm just going to wire them straight in. Alright, so do this for the other motor as well, so I'm going to do that to this one, and then we're going to move on to the crossed ESCs. Alright, now this is the second set of ESCs, and these are the other 2 that I'm going to be using, and you can notice here that I've switched this wire over here, so this is the middle wire, and I'm going to solder that to the top pad up here. And the top wire I'm going to solder to the middle pad. And the bottom wire is just running straight across. Alright, I'm going to do that to the last motor that I've got just here. Alright, now the next thing I'm going to do, because carbon fibre is conductive and we don't want to cause any shorts or fires or anything like that, we're just going to put some heat shrink over the ESCs. You could use some electrical tape or duct tape or something like that, but I've got some heat shrink lying around and it makes for a really nice build. So I'm just going to cut a small piece off like that and do 1 for each of these 4 ESCs. Alright, and then I'm going to shrink them down. So I'm going to do that for all 4 of these, shrink it down and get back to you. Alright, so I've shrunk my heat shrink down here on my ESCs, and this bit's very important. So we've got our 2 crossed ESCs just here where the wires were crossed, and these ones over here were the straight ones. Excuse this long hair that's in here. These ones here were the ones that went straight across, and the reason they're like that is because they have to spin different directions. So these 2 are going to spin clockwise with these OEM motors, and these 2 are going to spin anti-clockwise. And the clockwise ones just here, they're going to go on motors 1 and motors 4, so you can see this is the front of the quad just here where the arrow is. And you can see just here it says M1 and M4, so motor 1 will be clockwise, which is one of these, and motor 4, which is one of these, and then you've got your anti-clockwise ones, which will be motor 2 and motor 3, so they're going to end up like this. Alright, so now we're just about to put it all together, and the one thing I want to do just before we go any further, because we're going to have some friction on the bottom of here, and these are the underpads of the ESC, I'm going to put a little bit of electrical tape just on here to stop a short, just in case it wears through in the long run. So you don't have to do this, it's just a good little precaution. So you just need to put them under here where each of the arms go. This one, you'll barely ever notice too. Alright, so before we go any further, let's screw the thing together. God, I forgot the battery strap. All that and I forgot the battery strap. Alright, well I'm going to unscrew these and then put the battery strap back on. Can't believe I did that. So we're going to have our bottom plate. You're going to have each of your 4 arms in here and I guess your PDB or flight controller. Alright, so we're going to have the front facing this way, so this will be the underside, so you won't see this, so make sure you got your F1 writing up the correct way. And now this is a straight motor, so that can be motor 3. Here's another straight, that's going to be motor 2. And here's crossed, so we'll have 1 and 4. And our PDB is going to sit on top just like this. Alright, let's screw all this together. And what you're going to need to do this is these little standoffs just here, the small ones, and these longer screws just here. And then you go all the way from the bottom, all the way through the arms into the PDB and screwed on the top with this. So it might take a little bit of fiddling, but we'll get there. And I'm just going to loosely screw these on so I'll be able to slide my other arms in. So don't make these too tight just yet. Alright, so now I'm going to repeat this process with the others. So this should be, and always just double check your motors. This one's a straight one, so I'll be able to slide this in here. And then we've got our last one just here, motor 4, which is a crossed one, and this will be so it can spin clockwise. Now what we need to do, we're going to cut all these wires and solder them directly to the PDB, and just remember, I've got my positives just here on these little BESCs. The positive is the one actually closest to the ground wire and the signal wire just up here, but yours are probably red if you didn't switch them out like I did. So this side is the positive. You can see the little positives and negatives, so just connect those up. And where it says M1, M2, M3 and M4, that's just where you're going to connect this little white signal wire up here. So you're going to need to cut them pretty short and just join them up. So I'm going to cut all mine now. Now the way the positive and negative come out of the ESC, it actually doesn't line up perfectly because this side is negative and this side is positive, but it's reversed on just here. So I'm just going to flip these over like this, and that's going to line them up perfectly for me. So now I can solder for an extremely clean looking build. So I've just spun this over. And remember that negative is the side that's not near the signal or the ground of the actual ESC. So the negative is the one sort of all by itself. And now I'm just going to solder all these up. Rightio, so this is all wired. Now the next thing we need to do, we're going to put in our XT60 connector. So make sure you get this around the wrong way. They'll be around the right way. The plus is the flat side here, the positive, and the negative is the one that's curved. So line that up with these two terminals on here. Just push it in. It'll be a little bit of a tight fit, but a little bit of force and you can get it. Just through like that. And now what we're going to do, we're going to fill these with lead, so, well, with solder anyway. And just double check, yep, so that's positive there, because we don't want to have reverse polarity and just fry everything after all our hard work. So now I'm just going to fill this with solder, and a fair bit of it. Alright, so now's a good moment to test it, see if it works. So we can plug in a battery here and hopefully we get some sort of action happening. Positive action, not we don't want any smoke. Please, no smoke. Alright, well that's good. It's all looking good here. Let's keep going. We're going to now wire up our LED because this is our one chance to put this in. So I'm going to cut 3 sections of wire about 7 centimeters long. I'm going to attach one to the VDD, one to the DI, and one to the ground. And now we're going to solder them to this. Now the labeling is on the outside, but we want to label it behind it so it's nice and clean for our build. Alright, and now it's time to make, I guess, what you would call the top or the pod section. And I'm going to call this section here, because it sort of comes in 2 parts, so I'm going to call it the middle section and the top section for future reference. Alright, so to make the middle section, and this might look confusing, but trust me, it's really well thought out and really cleverly designed. And I'm also going to be putting a Loctite on each of these two so it doesn't come apart. So to make the middle section, what we're going to do here, we're going to take these 2 side plates and push them over, I guess, this sort of bridging plate. So they'll slide in like that, one on each side. And really push them in firmly. And this is going to sit on top of this sort of mounting plate just here. Now I've put these two little silver screws in before because I put them in, they'll come with it, but you'll need to put yours in just there as it sits there. Mine are just left over from when I built it before to see how it went together. And it's going to sit on there like this. Now these parts will be facing towards the back where it's sort of dipping down, and the back of this plate, this mounting bracket here, is where the two little hooks are. So once you put this together, you're going to slide in these two little standoffs because they need to be in there, and then you're going to put a little bit of Loctite in and screw those down, so we can do that. Alright, and then I'm going to put the screws in the other side. And you notice too, you're going to have some little mounting parts here. They'll be recessed in there, which is a fantastic, nice little addition. I love the way Armattan's done that. Alright, so now we're going to take this sort of little bracket here and we're going to mount it to, I guess, to this bottom base. And what you need to do, you've got some tiny little standoffs. They're going to sit just inside these two little holes just here. And then this is going to sit on top. And then you're going to put a screw straight through all the way. And you're going to have those silver screws in the bottom. Hang on if I can hold this. It's a little bit tricky, but it's going to go, the screw's going to go all the way through here into this silver nut at the bottom. And you'll actually need a different key to put this in, a different size key. So again, I'm going to put a bit of Loctite on here and then screw this in. Alright, and doing the same with the other one. Alright, so I guess that is the middle section of the pod. That's the middle section completed. Alright, so now it's time to build our top section, and we're only going to half build this because we still need to put our FPV gear into it. Now the best way I can explain this, the larger part needs to be on the outside and the smaller part needs to be on the inside. So you can see here they're recessed as different sizes. So keep the small one on the inside because that's where the HS117 is going to sit and it needs to fit nice and snug. Alright, so I'm going to put in these bottom two standoffs. And screw this into the other side, making sure it's around the right way. Alright, and when we're ready, we're going to put this standoff between these two and this will slide in here, but this will be some of the last parts we do because we've still got to put some things inside it, and we'll just connect that standoff with some of these little screws just here, or these large screws I guess. Alright, now just before you completely tighten up your top pod here, I'm going to put a little bit of electrical tape on the back of the LED board, and then you're going to sit your LED board in here as well as the F1 plate that comes with it for that little bit of extra strength. So the F1 plate will sit like that. Oh, it's got it on backwards. You know what, and that's no good unless you read it in a mirror. Alright, so we're going to sit it in just here because you're going to have two slits in the back. Like this. And if you didn't want to have your LED board, this is what you'd put in there, and then I'm going to sit my LED board just in front of that. There's a special slit for that as well. Alright, so I've got my LED plates in here, and the last thing we're going to do is put in our FPV camera. Now make sure you put this in the right way so it's so you're not looking at everything upside down, and that just slides inside here and you'll find two nice little riveted out sections for your HS117 to go in. Alright, there it is like that. Now tighten it up, and that's our top pod complete. Alright, and now's probably a good time as well to put your little screws in the outside just here to hold your HS117 camera in place. So I'm just going to screw these in just here and just make sure my camera's mounted relatively in the right direction. And a great part of this design is these screws are actually recessed in just here, so they're not going to catch on anything. They're actually behind that edge of the carbon. Okie dokie. Zoo zoo. Alright, now before we go any further, there's a couple of things we need to do. Alright, and one of those things we need to do is mount our D4R2. Now, I've had to recycle this one off one of my other quads, but I think this is a much better home for it. So, this is just the standard PPM receiver. You might have a different one out there that's compatible with your radio, but essentially it's all the same sort of process. Alright, so now before we put it together, I'm going to actually solder my receiver directly to my flight controller. The DIY kit did come with all these pins just here, which are fantastic, and I love these little inclusions. I'm not going to use them, but I'd say most people would, so definitely use these if you're not feeling confident directly soldering. And now when we're working with PPM, we're going to be using just this channel 1 here. So the signal is the top one, closest to the inside of the board. Now this might be a bit tricky holding this, filming and soldering, so bear with me. The next one here, we've got our positive, so I'm going to solder that in. And finally, we've got our ground, so I'm going to solder that in. Alright, next, one of the last things we have to do, we're getting pretty close to the end just here, but I'm going to put in my VTX and directly solder that to some of these just here. I'm using the Omway 200 milliwatt VTX. It can take 3 and 4S. It's a fantastic little transmitter, love it to death, trusted and tried, so I'm going to put this in because this quad deserves a good transmitter, and this is definitely it. So I'm just going to wire that in just here, and also make sure you've got one of these pigtails as well, because that's really going to help and it fits in nicely with this frame. Alright, I've had to rejig some things around and have a little bit of think about how I'm going to fit some of this stuff in, because it is a fairly tight little build just here. But instead of putting my VTX at the back here like I originally planned, I'm actually going to run it just sitting underneath here on top of my flight controller and around the side. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One, it's going to make the camera tilt a lot easier so I can swivel it up and down. And the second part is, when this antenna comes out this bottom little hook just here, at maximum it's only going to be up this high. So if I have the antenna coming out the top, it's going to make it a lot taller quad, so it's going to have a nice lower profile even with the antenna mounted. Now up the top here, I've got a little connection between my VTX and this end will plug into my HS117. If you click on this link in the video right here, that'll take you showing the process of how I made this up, because I've done this again on another quadcopter video, on another Armattan one actually. So the first thing I'm going to do is just solder in the negative and positive for the VTX. And it's really important you set whatever VTX channels you want now, because it is going to be kind of difficult to change them later. So next I'm going to solder in my LEDs, just hardwire them straight to this flight controller. So I'm going to go to pin 5 for the signal, which is the DI port on the back of the LED, ground goes to the ground, and VDD is the 5 volt input. And I can just get that off here, so the signal, 5 volt and the ground. Alright, and now we're going to connect our VTX to our camera just here, so we're going to plug that in, and then I'm going to hit everything with some hot glue. And that hot glue is going to stop any of these snapping off or coming apart, because it is kind of tricky and crammed in here, so we want to keep it nice and stable and locked in so there's no breakages when we're flying. Alright, so things we're going to hot glue, I'm going to hot glue the pins on my receiver, because I've taken them out and I don't want anything to break while they're up here. Alright, but you probably won't have to do that step. And next I'm going to hot glue down here just the connection where my VTX wires join. More hot glue, so we're going to go over here to, oh hang on, this end's coming out. We're going to go over here and we're going to hot glue in where the VTX powers from. This also ends up powering the camera, so it's important that this doesn't come apart. Then we have to hot glue where our LEDs join and also where our receiver joins to our flight controller. So I'll probably cut you out a shot here, but that's what I am gluing over the top of. Now you can use epoxy as well, but at least the benefit of hot glue is you can always pull it off, where epoxy can be a bit more difficult to try and get off. Alright. Looks good and messy. And you know what, while I'm at it, why don't I hot glue the signal wires down here on the ESCs as well. So the signal and the ground wires. Alright, so now I'm going to fit all this together, and you're just going to have to excuse me, I don't really have a technique for this other than just trying to cram it all in and doing my best. So essentially you need to fit this in just inside here, and make sure you're squishing the receiver down nice and tight. And I've also got a little bit of double-sided tape here to hold my VTX in place. Alright, so I think that's it. Alright, so I think I've sort of got it fitting there, but just before I do, I'm going to put some Loctite on some of these bolts before we push them down. Alright, so there's the pod officially bolted down, And now I'm just going to put this little screw in just here for the VTX. Alright, and now I'm just going to feed, look, I've only got one receiver because my D4R2 got cut off and I had to recycle it, so I'm just going to feed this up the back, out the back here. Alright, so this part's pretty hilarious. You'll see in a moment the antenna of the D4R2 actually broke off and I couldn't believe it. So I end up replacing the antenna anyway and putting new ones on, so that's what you'll see in a minute. But for a small moment I was really confused because I couldn't understand what was going on. My mind was just blank. Alright, and so here's my receiver wire, and I'm just going to mount. So you can see me just picking it up and thinking, what's just happened? That shouldn't happen. So I come in for a closer inspection. It was really confusing because I barely touched it. Anyway, we'll move on and get back to the build. Alright, so you're not going to believe this. I was literally about to mount my antenna and this little silver part here fell off because it was an old D4R2. So, after a bit of waiting and mucking around, I've put some new D4R2 antennas on here. So we're good to go, we're good to keep going. So that's why I have a different coloured antenna here, and I have two of them because I figured, well, since I've got the D4R2 open, I might as well replace both of them. Alright, and the way I'm going to mount my antennas is I'm going to have two zip ties coming off here off the top of my LED board, and because the antennas will only go a little bit past it, it'll probably stick up about maybe 3 centimeters above the LED board. So I'm just going to put my zip ties on, excuse that long hair. Alright, so that'll be one for one antenna mount, and I'm just going to tape that just there like that. And I'll do the same on the other side. Alright, now I'm just going to cut these down to size so they're not sticking up too much. Alright, and that's going to be what I tape my antennas to. Alright, and I've just put a little bit of heat shrink just here to hold the antennas to the zip ties. So I'm going to go heat that up and I'll be back. Alright, so I've heat shrunk it all down here. It looks fantastic, nice and neat. Now, pretty much we only have a couple more things to do. We need to put these screws in the side, and that's to hold our sort of very top pod part in. And these are these big screws here, and they're made so that you can use your fingers to loosen it if you need to change the angle. Then we're going to put these last little screws in these holes here that hold the frame together. And then we're going to put some props on. Now we're just going to put these screws in each of these arms, and if you remember, I put duct tape over mine, so I'm just going to pierce the duct tape in each one so the screw can go through. Alright, and you're going to slide it through, hopefully. There we go. And be careful not to pinch your ESC wires here. And then we're going to screw these down into these little silver sort of automatic locking nuts just here. So they're all in. I like to use a little bit of gentle persuasion, but they're in now, and I'm just going to... But they're all in. Now I'm just going to put some props on and attach the antenna, the VTX antenna. And we're good to go. Woo! Alright, now remember the clockwise motors, which is motor 1 and motor 4, they need to have the reverse props, and then just the normal props, they're going on motors 3 and motor 2. There's my other prop, there it is. Alright, and now we just need to tighten these down with some lock nuts. Alright, so she's a little beauty. I absolutely love it, and if you think it was fun building it, wait till you fly this thing. It is an absolute beast. So I hope I helped some of you guys out there. For more FPV content, subscribe, and as always, happy flying! Alright, and so here's my receiver wire, and I'm just going to mount